To build this chart, I'm going to show you how to properly set up your data. Then we're going to build the basic chart. After that, we'll dive into a bunch of different customizations so you can truly make this chart your own. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. Before we can build this chart, we have to set up our data. And if you look at it, we have total views on a YouTube channel by month. So let's start setting that up. The first thing I want to do is create an object down here called view month, and it does need to conform to identifiable, and that's because we are going to use a for each in our chart. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's conform to identifiable, so say let ID equals a new UUID, and then we need two properties on our view month, and these two properties are going to be our X and our Y axis. Looking at the chart, the X axis is the date, right? We just want to show the month, January, February, March. The Y axis is actually the value of how many views we got that month on our YouTube channel. Let date of type date, and then let views is of type int. So that is our view count. Actually, that's probably a better name. Anytime something's plural kind of insinuates an array with naming. Anyway, it's a little side tangent. So now that we have our object, our view month, this is what we're going to build our chart around. Now, of course, in your app, your model, your object could be a lot more complex, but the key thing here is as long as you have data that can represent an x-axis and a y-axis, again, our x-axis is going to be the date, our y-axis is going to be the view count, you'll be good to go. Now that we have our object, we need to set up some dummy data. So for that, I'm going to copy and paste in a little bit of code to spare you the time of me typing, but it's not a lot, and I'll explain it. The first thing here is a date extension. And this allows me to create a date, right? So for my view month, I have to create, January, February, March. So I can create a date by passing in a year, month, day, and I create date components based on that year, month, day that I pass in, and then I create a date object based on those date components. You'll see that in action right now, actually, because we're going to create our dummy data. So up in our content view, I need an array of view months, right? I want 12 view months that have, January, February, March with the view count as well. So we'll say let view months, and that is an array of type view month. And then I'll create this array, and we will do .init. I'm going to do this once, and then I'm going to copy and paste in the rest to save some time. So you can see it takes in a date and a view count. So the date I need to create. So we'll use our date extension here, date.from. You can see year, month, day. That's that extension I created down there on line 39. So I can pass in the year. We'll say 2023. The month is 1, and the day is 1. It's always going to be the first of the month. And the view count will say 55,000. So again, to spare some time, I'm going to copy and paste the rest of the months. And there we are. I just did the same thing 11 more times to get February, March, April, May, June, etc. All of year 2023, and then all of various view counts. So now that our data is set up, let's start building that chart. And we're going to do this using the new Swift Charts framework introduced in iOS 16. So first things first, we need to import charts. There we go. Here in the body of our view, we just have the default, hello world view. Let's get rid of the image and the text. I'm going to keep the VStack because we're going to use that towards the end of the video once we make it look a little nicer. So we'll delete that. And now that we've imported Swift Charts, we have access to chart. And in here is where we build our bar chart where we're going to iterate over this array and create data from it. So iterating over the array, we need a for each. There is a way where you can just pass in chart and then pass in, view months similar to list. You know how in list you don't have to have the for each, but we're going to do a bunch of customizations. It's going to be easier if we just do the for each. So for each data and content, the data is going to be view months, and then the content, we'll say view month. And then now here in our for each, we're going to create what's called a mark. Now in Swift Charts, there are a bunch of different kinds of marks: line mark, area mark, bar mark. This is a bar chart, so we're going to do a bar mark. Bar mark. And you can see you get a whole bunch of options. We're just going to do X and Y right here. What you're going to see in Swift Charts is there's so many options, ways to customize things. We're going to keep this relatively high level. I plan on doing a whole course on Swift Charts someday because there is that much there in this framework. It's awesome. But for the basics, we just want an X and a Y. So for this, we need to pass in a value, and you can see the label key is whatever we call this. So this is our x-axis. So our x-axis, we're going to call it month, right? That's our date. And the value here is going to be based on this view month that we're iterating over. So we'll do view month dot date. And then for the date, we can do a unit here. We want to specify, we want just the month. Now we're doing this because this is a date object. If you had something else on your x-axis, you wouldn't need to do that. But for the y-axis, we want to do view month dot view count. So again, we're iterating over this array. For the x-axis, give me the month. For the y-axis, give me the count. And actually, it is nicer for the bar marks to put your X and the Y down here in the parentheses. I normally don't like doing this with things that have parentheses, but I think this does look a lot better. And actually putting them on new lines made me realize I need to do .value here. So let me retype that all. You see it takes in a plottable value. That's what's telling me right here. It's expecting an argument type plottable value. So that's why you do the .value And then the label key is views. And then now we do view month dot view count. And you should see it magically appear here in a second. Let me refresh my preview. Bam, there's the chart. We get a lot for free. Like all I had to do was type that and we get this. Now, of course, like I said in the intro, we're gonna start with this basic chart and there's a ton of customizations you can do to make it look custom in your own. But this is what you start with. We get this for relatively low effort out of the box. And I think that's an amazing start. I love this. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do to tame this beast is that just looks like too much here. So on my chart, I'm going to give it a dot frame with a height of 180. All right, now we're looking a little more reasonable on our chart. Before we dive into the deep customizations, let's do some basic ones. So your bar mark, you can give a foreground style. You can say color dot, we'll say pink. Cool, there's pink, and you can even add dot gradient on the end. That's new in iOS 16. Give it a nice little subtle gradient. If you like, you can also change the corner radius. So you see there's a little bit of rounded corner there, but if I do, I don't know, 10, you can play with this. Now we get some like rounded corners. So again, you can customize these bar marks to look however you like. And if you wanted no corner radius, put a 0 in there and you get the perfect squares. I'm going to delete this to keep the default style. The default style has a subtle corner radius. I kind of like that. And I'll give you a sneak peek. We won't go too far down this path because it's a totally different type of chart. But remember, I said there's a bunch of different kinds of marks. This was a bar mark. Well, what's great about charts, just change that bar mark to a line mark. Bam, you got a line chart just like that. Again, little preview because you can customize line charts a lot differently. You can give interpolation values. We're not going to go down that path. That's for another video. Let's go back to a bar mark. I just wanted to show you that by changing the mark type, you can get a totally different chart. It's really cool. So here we have this horizontal bar chart, but we can easily get a vertical bar chart. And we can do that just by switching the X and Y values. So instead of having the months on the X axis, I'm going to put that down here on the Y axis, and then up on the X axis, we'll retype it again. Value, we'll say views, and that was view month dot view count. And then look at there, we get a vertical bar chart just like that, with now our months are on the y-axis and our view count is on the x-axis. So again, I love this framework. As someone who's built a lot of custom charts before for Creator View, this is a godsend. I love this. So I'm gonna Command Z, and we're gonna go back to the horizontal chart because once we start like going into the deep customization, which we'll do in a second, it's not as easy to switch back and forth between horizontal and bar chart. So pick which type of chart you're gonna do before you get deep into these customizations. Before we start tackling those deep customizations, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to help you get that iOS developer portfolio, blog, or personal website up and running very quickly. Now I know we're all developers with the skills and the desire to build the web page ourselves. But I would argue there's an opportunity cost to your time. If you're an iOS developer trying to build a great product, a great app, maybe spending a lot of time learning the ins and outs of web development, responsive design isn't the best way to spend your time. That's why I recommend Squarespace to build that personal website, the blog, your portfolio, or maybe a landing page for your app. They have all kinds of beautiful themes and templates to get you started. They handle all the analytics and the SEO for you. Again, it just saves you so much time so you can get back to doing what you want to do, and that is building iOS apps. So when you're ready to get started, go to squarespace.com to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/SeanAllen to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. For these deep customizations, we're going to talk about a rule mark. We're going to customize our plot area, and then we're going to customize the x-axis and the y-axis and the grid lines. Like I said, you can get really deep into these customizations. And to be honest with you, we're only going to scratch the surface. This is a very deep framework. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a rule mark. This chart object here kind of acts like a Z-stack. So if I want to add my rule mark behind the bars, which you'll see in a second, I type it above it, kind of like a Z-stack. So rule mark. And you can see again, there are a bunch of different ways to do the rule mark. I just want rule mark Y because I want a line going across the Y-axis to represent a goal. So again, like you see, it's a plottable value. I can't just pass an integer in here. I have to do .value with a label key of goal. And then the value, we'll say 80,000 is our goal. And then you see I get this goal line there, this blue line. You can customize this. Again, you can customize pretty much everything in here. But I want to show you how the chart behaves. So you see how that line is behind the bars. Well, if I cut my rule mark and put it below the bar chart, now you can see it's in front of the bars. So that's just personal preference, what kind of style you like. I like that bar to be behind it. But let's start customizing it a little bit. We can change the line style. So we'll do stroke style. And with stroke style, you can pass in, line width. You can add dashes. So let's do line width of, say, 1. and then dash. We'll pass in a 5 there to get some decent dashes. But now you see we have a dash line based on the stroke style that we passed in. And again, you can have a blast with this, pass in whatever stroke style you like to customize it. The last thing I want to talk about the rule mark is the annotation, because what is this line, right? There's no label. We don't know what this line is. So let's add an annotation. Here you can see position, alignment, spacing. We'll come back to that. But for the content, we're going to do a text of goal. And you can see, okay, this is where we're going to mess with the alignment. It's not great, right? It's in the middle. It's big. First, let's go dot font. We'll call this caption font, and then we'll do foreground color of dot secondary. So you can see it doesn't dominate the chart a little bit, but you still can't see it. Let's adjust the position. So as you saw when we built our annotation, we have the position parameter, but that's actually not what I'm looking for. Well, I'll play with it to show you. So position, say dot leading, get rid of that content view here. And you can see it puts it off the chart leading. That's not what we wanted. Actually, what I wanted was alignment. So let's do alignment.leading. There you go. So now it is above the line, off to the left, as you see there. Probably still not great, because if January was a really tall bar, it would cover up the goal. But just showing you that you can have an annotation on that line. You know, how you display it is up to you and your chart. Now let's talk about the plot area. So the plot area is the area behind the bars. So that is a modifier on our chart. Let's get rid of that white space up there. And so below frame, let's do dot chart plot style. You can see it gives us, you know, the plot content. So we'll say plot content. And here is where we can customize that plot content. So we'll do plot content. Okay. Previews have been crashing. I don't know what's going on there. Plot, it'll come back. Plot content. And you can see you can do dot background. And we'll say dot mint dot gradient dot opacity 0.3. Again, you can customize this however you like. So there you go. We have a mint background. There's a slight gradient. Can't really see it. And it is opacity of 3. You want to change the color? Maybe you want it to be black. There you go. You can completely customize the background of your plot content. And you can also add a border if you like. Dot border. We'll say it is a color of dot green. And the width is 3. We'll make it so you can really see it. So you can see now we have a green border. Of course, it's looking really ugly. I don't recommend styling your chart like this, but that is the chart plot style. I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out because I don't want it looking like that, but I'll leave the code there so you can see it. Now for probably the deepest customization is the X and Y axis and grid line customizations that you can do. So we're gonna start with some super basic ones, and that is just hiding the axis. Maybe there's a time where you just want a real clean looking chart. You don't even wanna show the axis. So again, a modifier on the chart, you can do chart x-axis visibility. You can see dot hidden. So now the x-axis is gone. And then I will copy that, paste that there. Chart y-axis is hidden. So now my chart has no axes. Now, most of the time, you're going to want to let the user know what's going on the axes, but maybe there's a little chart preview you want to have and you don't need the axes, all the detail. This is a good way to hide those. And again, if you only want to hide one of them, we'll just do chart x-axis hidden. Now you got just the y-axis, but no x-axis. But we'll get rid of both of those. So now we want our axes back because we are going to customize those. The last thing I want to show you before we get into the deep customization is you can change the y-axis domain. You notice we got the 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 based on our data, right? Based on all our view counts up here. Swift was smart enough to give us some intelligent, nice round even numbers for our chart. But we can control that y-axis with a simple modifier. Chart y scale, and you can see it takes in a domain. So domain is just a range. So 0, we'll say to 200,000. So now you can see my chart, the max is 200,000. Let's add a 0 to it. Let's say 2 million. So now you can see that's not looking like a great chart, but you can control your y-axis if you want to show a different range. Delete the 0 to go back to 200,000. And then if we go down to 20,000, now all the bars, go off the grid. So make sure it's, within a reasonable range here. Now you can see my max is 200,000. Maybe I wanted it to be 400,000. Maybe I have high goals. But the point is, you can adjust this y-axis if you need to. I'm going to comment this out, go back to the default values. Again, the intelligent default values I would recommend sticking with, but hey, if you need to customize it, you have that option. Okay, let's dive into some deeper customization of the x-axis and the y-axis. We're going to focus on the x-axis because as you can see, the default values gave us the quarterly, right? January, April, July, October. Well, for my style, my design, I want the individual months. As you can see here, right? I want January, February, March, April, May. And I also don't want all these grid lines. I want a cleaner chart. So that's what we're going to focus on doing here. So that is a modifier on the chart. So we'll say chart x-axis and then content. So as you can see, if I leave a blank chart x-axis, do a Command B, it gets rid of the x-axis chart. There's no vertical grid lines. There's no, value labels down here on the x-axis. So if I want to add the default in, I can do axis marks with no parameters. We'll get to the parameters in a second. And that gives us the default, what we just had. We didn't really change anything. You can see our vertical grid lines. You can see our labels. We're good to go. But let's start passing in some custom axis marks and mess with our grid lines and all that stuff. So you can see the axis marks can take in values. That's what I want here. See values in its array of plottable. So let's do that. I don't want a format style. We'll come back to that. So the values I want to pass in are the months, right? January, February, March, April. But I want to have all the months because by default, I'm only getting 4. And they probably do that to make the chart look cleaner, but we're going to customize this. So what I can do is view months.map. I'll explain this line of code in case you're not super familiar. Just let me type it out. $0.date, and we'll say date in. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm mapping through my view months and creating a new array of just the dates. So this is an array of dates, and that's what I'm using for my axis marks. And it gives me that date in return if I need to use it in here for the logic of creating my marks. You'll see we're not going to use it, but I'll show you how you could potentially use it. So now that I'm within my axis marks, you can see I still have no vertical grids. I have nothing. Like I said, if you pass nothing in here, there's no x-axis labels, there's no vertical grids. So let's add in the vertical grids here. So axis grid line. Now I get my vertical grid lines back. Now, if you saw when I initialize the grid line, I can pass in a stroke. Just like we did before, up top with our goal line, you can pass in a specific dash stroke, you can make it solid, you can customize how the grid line looks. For this chart, I actually don't want a grid line. I want a cleaner look. But what I do want access to is my value labels because I want to customize the January, February, March. So what I can do is axis value label, I'm sorry. And again, so much customization can go on here. Look at all the different axis value labels. I get that it can be overwhelming. We're going to keep it simple. Again, this is your introduction into the Swift charts world. There's a lot going on. I want just the format because the format style, I have a date. If I had a number, I could do a number formatter, for currency or something like that, but we have a date. So I'm going to do .datetime.month, and this is new in iOS 15, the new date formatting. And then, so you can see now if I do datetime.month and pass in the default values, now look, I get Jan, Feb, March, April, May. That looks good. I like the way that looks. One could argue that's a little cluttered. Maybe you did just want the first letter of the month. So the datetime.month can pass in a .narrow parameter to give you just January, February, March, April, May, June. Now, I'm gonna show you something else, and I'm pretty sure it's a Swift UI bug because we're using, default dates. We're using all the default stuff. I'm not writing custom code here, but you can also have a centered parameter for your label. So if I do centered true, you'll notice now the letter, let me undo that in case you missed it here. So we'll undo the centered and I'll take it back. You can see the January, February, March labels are aligned like left, right? They're aligned leading. It looks a little weird. They're not directly below the bars. So if I pass in centered true, it does center them. That looks great. However, you notice the December's gone. Like where's December? The D at the end dropped off. If someone knows the fix to that, let me know. I couldn't figure it out. Because we're using all SwiftUI default stuff, and this is a brand new framework in iOS 16, I'm assuming that might be a little bit of a bug, but if it's not, let me know. Okay, we have our axis label. I chose not to do axis grid lines, but I'm gonna show you this so you know the three main components here. You have axis grid line, axis tick. So you can see the axis tick is, it's very faint. I'll zoom in. Next to the month name, you see the grid line goes by the label. So you can visually separate them. I'm gonna comment out the tick and watch. You see, that is gone for a cleaner look. Put the tick back in, down there, that's what the tick is. I'm gonna take that out. I'm also gonna take the grid line out, but I'm gonna leave it commented so you can see the structure. So you have grid line, tick, and value label, and you can customize these deeply, each one of these elements, as you can see we've started to do. So there's our x-axis customization that you can have fun with. You can do the same thing with the y-axis. I'm not gonna go as deep into it because it's basically the same as the x-axis, but I do wanna show you one thing here with the y-axis that we can do. You can do axis marks. As you can see, there's preset, position, value, stroke. I just want to do position. So we'll say position, I can do .leading. So now if you look, my y-axis is on the left. So whether you want your y-axis values on the left or the right, you can do that by the position of the axis mark leading. I'm gonna comment that out and it is back to the, oh, nope. Remember, if we don't pass in any axis marks, we get nothing. It deletes that whole axis. So we do want axis marks. We just don't want to pass in a parameter of leading for that. So now the default axis marks puts it back over there. And again, I could customize the grid line. I could get rid of the grid lines, but you'll notice the grid lines in the axis tick is all part of the overall axis marks. So I would have to do axis marks with some content. Now I get nothing for the y-axis, but let's say I did want the axis value label, but just the default. Again, if you just want the default, you just do the initializer there. Say I want axis grid line, but just the default. There you go, now my grid lines are back. But like I said, I wanted the cleaner one. potentially. So let's comment out the axis grid line. Now you can see there's no grid lines on the axis. I actually like them. I like a little bit of grid lines. I just don't want grid lines all over the place. But hopefully you're starting to see the deep customizations in the Swift chart framework. The last thing I'm going to show you is how you can dress the chart up a little bit, because right now we just have a basic chart. But remember, I kept this VStack from the beginning. Remember, the chart is just an element in the VStack. So I'm going to copy and paste some code in here because it is basic Swift UI code, just to save some time. This video is getting long. But if you wanted a title and like a subtitle for your chart, look, I just typed a text of YouTube views. There it is. And then this text is the total. So this reduce, if you're not familiar with it, it basically just adds up all the view counts. So you can see the total view counts are 1.036 million. And then just some basic Swift UI formatting, right? Font weight, font color, padding, that kind of stuff. Now this title is centered by default, but we can fix that on our VStack by doing an alignment of .leading. And then I'm gonna add some spacing just to clean it up here of 4. Now you can see, so YouTube views, the total is right there. And that gives us a nice heading, but that's just basic Swift UI code. That has nothing to do with the chart, right? The chart is a separate element. We added our own title here in the VStack to get the look that we want. And then, like I said, this goal annotation here could get in the way, right? If January was a high bar, that's not gonna quite work. So let's actually comment out this annotation, keep it clean, but we'll add something down here under the chart in our VStack, kind of our own little legend that I created. But I'm demonstrating that a chart can just be part of a Swift UI view. So I'm pasting in this HTAG. What it is, it's an SF symbol, line diagonal. There's actually no straight line in SF symbol. So I had to rotate that diagonal 145 degrees to get a horizontal line, made it mint, and then called it text monthly goal. As you can see here, that looks a little tight. So let's add some padding to the bottom of our chart. Padding, dot bottom. And there you go, that spaces it out. So that tells us what that line is. I guess I could have made it a dash line. But anyway, that tells us what the line is, and it's a much cleaner looking chart. Like I said, we just scratched the surface on this Swift charts framework. I'm loving it. It's super powerful. If you enjoyed my teaching style, you like how I present things, I have my own courses at seanallen.teachable.com.